it's something about the streets that when you get used to the streets, it makes you fearless. And so when you meet people in the streets and you start hanging out with street people, they make you feel like you can jump over a moving train and still live, you know?
What does that mean, get used to the streets? Like, be comfortable out there by yourself?
Yes, be comfortable out there by yourself, interacting with people. Because I wasn't a street girl, you know? But me being out there, you just get more comfortable. You begin to be like, wait a minute, I'm fearless too, because you got to do what they do, you know?
Welcome to another episode of Bite-Sized Biographies, the podcast of life stories. My name is Corey Thorpe. If you enjoy this podcast, consider telling your life story on it by going to bitesizebiographies.com/story now. It's not just life stories we want to hear. You can also send your individual stories through text or audio. Once again, the website is bitesizebiographies.com/story. If you don't have a story to share, but want to contribute to the podcast, share this podcast with a friend of yours. Be sure to listen until the end of the episode for some extra information about this podcast and a promotion for another podcast you might enjoy. Now, on to this episode's conversation. Chalet, thank you so much for joining me.
Yes.
I really appreciate it.
Yes.
So, why don't we just start right at the beginning? Why don't we start with your childhood? And why don't you tell me about what it was like for you growing up?
So I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. It was mainly at this time, Brooklyn has changed so much now. It's like very diverse. Gentrification is really taking over. But when I grew up, it was all African American for the most part, you know. And I was the only child, so I'm the only child. My parents were pretty middle class, which was also different. We had a stream of middle class parents there, but you know, it was like a mix of middle class and low class, you know, kind of parent class system. In Bedford-Stuyvesant is where I grew up, and it was a difficult period, I would say, because crack had just hit the community. So some of my like earliest childhood memory, you know, I had a great like childhood as the only child. My mother actually didn't think she could have any children, which was a very interesting story. So she always calls me her miracle baby.
Yeah.
You know, very exciting when she had me. So both my mother and father were very excited to have me. My parents were divorced by the time I was 3 years old. Very early age, but both of my parents played a very active role in my life.
Oh, that's good.
And yeah, for the most part, my mother and father had a great friendship. So they're still very close, you know, as friends. So, you know, no drama there for the most part. And basically, growing up, I remember being young. My mother did not want me to go to the community schools. So she kept me kind of isolated. I remember having like an isolated childhood. But, you know, it caused me to be an avid reader. And so I used to read a lot of books and write. And I was like, Mom, why can't I play with the kids across the street? And she'd be like, no, you can't play with them. You got to come home from school and come in the house and do your work. And I mean, now I understand, but at that time, it felt like, this is terrible. You know, my life sucks, you know, because my dad was a pastor and a cop at this time, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So think about that combination?
A pastor and a police officer. Yeah, that's a unique one.
Oh, my goodness. Yes. And at the time he was assistant pastor of a church that was like up the block from me, around the corner. So very close. So he knew everybody in the community, you know, for the most part. And my mother was a guidance counselor at one of the roughest schools in Brownsville, which is not too far from Bed-Stuy, where I grew up. So my father was overprotective in one way because he was, you know, a city cop. And so he knew exactly, you know, kind of what was going on. You know,
he knew what was out there.
Yeah. He was like, no, I got to protect my baby. And being a pastor, he was like, this is the way of the Lord, you know?
Yeah.
And the funny thing about that is that, like, I resented that for a long time. Like, I was like, oh my God, I don't have normal parents, you know? And there was conversations that growing up that my friends were able to have with their parents that I did not feel comfortable having until like now, and even now I'm still a little guarded, but
like what kind of like birds and the bees conversations or what kind of
like birds and the bees, like if a guy likes me, it was just not, everything was about God, and and sometimes you just need that advice that's like, give me the real deal here, It was none of that with my parents. My mother was very strict, and so it kind of shaped me, to be a certain way. And I remember growing up in the 80s, it was a lot of drug dealers. I've seen people, heard people, who were alive one week and then died the next week. Some of my friends' parents got on drugs, crack epidemic hit our community really hard, And I remember being on the stoop with my best friend. She lived a couple of blocks over from me, and we would see the crackheads, and it was kind of a joke for us, at the time that we were young. We didn't know, we were like, 11, 12, and we were like, oh, look, the crackhead is about to fall over. And so we would make a bet, like she's going to fall over, So these are like stupid things that we did because we didn't realize the power, the effects it had on our communities, But also one thing that is very important to realize is that, looking back, I see how things have had an effect on, the way that I am as a person and the way things happen. But yeah, so that was a little bit of my childhood. In my teenage years, things started to take a turn. Actually, I became like a runaway child.
Oh my gosh.
Story. Yes. When I started running away at like 12 years old.
Well, so wait one second. Before we get into the runaway story, I want to know more about the school situation. So you said your mom was hesitant. Did you still go to the school or did you go somewhere else?
No, she sent me to a private school. So I was in private school all my life, up until 12th grade, actually, up until I went to college. So I wore a uniform, which was also a difference in the community. Most of the kids that lived in my community went to the city schools. So when you lived, I had two buses. By the time I was in high school, it took me 2 public transportation buses to go to school. My mom got me bused to my elementary school. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so she always kept me in private school. The first school was St. Mark's Lutheran School, and it was a Christian school. And I must say that the teachers cared about me. It was a homogeneous kind of community, like we were all Blacks, and so there was no like, inferiority of any type. And the students, they worked us. I mean, like, things that students, they don't do in schools these days, like penmanship and making sure that we know how to spell words and spelling bees and taking it, like it's life skills and teaching us about, we had a teacher that came in about health and hygiene and STDs. And
wow.
They taught us yes, it was that serious. They taught us about life, and those teachers cared about us. Most of our classroom sizes were small. And, I remember, the school was run by a pastor, Nordine, at the time. He ran a church also. So we did a lot of community service, a lot of teaching about Christ and good living. And most of 95% of the teachers were Black, except for maybe 1 or 2. And even I remember Miss Nordine was the pastor's wife, and she was one of my hardest teachers ever. But she was amazing and really just required excellence out of us,
Yeah.
I don't think at that time, even though we were all Black kids, I don't think we looked at Miss Nordine as being like anything different, like that didn't care about us because she was white. We didn't know about that dynamic for the most part. I remember we had this music teacher who's also another white teacher that we had, Mr. Mint, and I'll never forget him because when he left for Florida, we all cried because he taught us songs like Duke Ellington, Take the A Train,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, he was a soulful dude, and we just loved him. Yes.
So did he retire to Florida or what happened?
Yes, he moved in the middle of our, while I was still at school, they moved to Florida, and we were all sad, So just to think, like, I was in my homogeneous community, not really even knowing about, like, yes, I know I had these white teachers, but they loved us so much. I didn't see it. I didn't see, what the dynamics of what really went on outside of my circle, pretty protected,
Yeah. So you lived in Bed-Stuy, but you bused to other communities to go to your private school, to another community. Okay.
Yes.
And so were your friends mostly friends from school? You mentioned like your mom didn't want you hanging out with the kids across the street who were just in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. You know, the truth, tell you the truth, I was the only child, which had its own disadvantages and advantages. You know, I mean, people always say, you're spoiled as only child. That wasn't my life, though. I wasn't spoiled at all. You know, for the most part, my mother was rigorous on me. Like I said, my mother was a guidance counselor. So she was always worried about me. She worked in Brownsville and she saw the roughest of kids who had no mothers, no fathers, parents strung out on drugs, joined gangs, you know, things that really disturbed her. And she wanted to make sure that I was not going to fall into that statistic at all. Even though I didn't have the demographics to fall into that statistic, she was just very strict on me, you know, like, and so, you know, she wanted me to make sure, you know, me and my mother were disconnected for some years because of her. I felt like she was harsh. You know, if I got a B, it wasn't good enough. I had to get an A, you know, and if I got a 90, why didn't I get 100? If I didn't score good on a test, you know, so it was pressure. And, you know, I think I built up a little like anxiety because of that, you know, because I had to please my mother. And if you didn't cross the T, you had to write the whole paper over, you know, so she was stern and strict.
Wow. That sounds rough.
Yeah. She was like, I was like a little soldier in my house, you know, like all the hangers had to be a certain color. They had to go a certain way. All my underwear had to be in my underwear drawer. Shirts had to be in my shirt drawer, you know, so everything was like orderly. Yes. Very strict household. And so that's kind of basically happened before I start running away.
So you said your parents divorced, but both of your parents played an active role in your childhood. Did you live in both houses, or did you live with just your mother and you'd go see your father? How did that work?
Yes. So I lived with my mother and I would go see my father mostly on the weekends. But, you know, the funny thing is I went to high school. My dad was always a present for. I don't remember anything that I did that my dad wasn't there. You know, like he didn't come. Yeah, never. I mean, even to this day, you know, he's still there. But when I'm thinking about high school, I went to high school around the corner from where my dad lived, and he used to come around there all the time. And when I didn't have money for lunch, he would work out a deal. Like if she comes to school, she doesn't have money for lunch, you give her money and you count it up and I'll give it back to you.
Oh,
you know?
That's so nice of him.
Yes.
Looking out for you.
Yes, always. So, you know, I was blessed in that way.
You mentioned a little bit that you would see these people who were on drugs kind of falling over or whatever. You didn't really know what was going on.
Yeah.
Did you see other ways that it affected you visibly in the community? Because you also mentioned that you'd have people like parents who, friends who you know got onto drugs. But did you know what that was when you were a kid? Or did you see dealers or anything else that as a kid made you feel a certain way?
Well, I didn't really understand the full dynamics until I got a teenager. And at this time, like drug dealers was like, oh my, it was almost like this sick kind of fantasy thing, like you get with a drug dealer. Oh my God, you're going to have your first beeper. He going to take care of you. You know what I'm saying? And so it was like, oh, he got money, girl, And unfortunately at this time, a lot of older guys love young girls. And it was, they got away with it, I mean, in our communities, that was a normal thing. Like, it was, you could see a 14-year-old that was dating an older man. And, and of course, you didn't realize it was taboo until you got older, Yeah,
you don't know.
Yeah, you don't know because you're just having fun and you just, think it's all part of fun and, games and life. So, yeah, that was more like drug deals was more like he's risky, I mean,
it's like a taboo.
It was a glorified
it's
lifestyle. Yes, it was a glorified lifestyle in the hood, Yeah, so when seeing people on drugs is real sad because, you would see somebody like a couple of months ago who looked really good and then all of a sudden they just go down and was like, oh my God, what happened to Miss Frida? I'm making up a name, but what happened to her, And then what I saw specifically was the effect that it had on my friends. So I saw a lot of my friends that I grew up with. Like my mother didn't let me hang out with people. So I really would have to either sneak or, this is why I became a runaway child for most part. Or I just, would have. So when I would see my friends, like, they got pregnant at an early age or, their brothers, began selling drugs or they were gangsters or you would hear about these murders that happen or these deaths or, tragic things that happen in the community because of mothers being strung out on drugs, or fathers being strung out on drugs. or the abuse that went on in the homes, or people doing life in prison because they, got high one day and went crazy, so that was the effect of it.
Well, let's go into that a little bit. So you mentioned that your mom had things that, she wanted things a certain way.
Yes.
And she wanted you to behave in a very disciplined manner.
Yes.
You mentioned that as you became a teenager, you're 12 years old, just about to become a teenager, you started running away. What did you do? What was that like?
I think I rebelled because I felt like my life was, I think I was sad, I felt like I couldn't be a kid, I didn't have fun. Like, I didn't know how to do the things kids did. I didn't know how to play double dutch, and I didn't know how to just all the things that I saw the little girls doing outside. I was ignorant to that. I didn't learn how to fight until I got older in the street and everybody else. So I was picked on because I was sensitive, and, sheltered, and people knew that my parents, had, basically middle class parents, which was different than some of the people in the community, but I would say it was a community back then. So you had a lot of people who were just great middle class people doing things, but then you had another side of the community, people that were just, kind of living off the system, welfare, and just, you had both of those dynamics. But, I just felt like I was sad. I didn't know what life was about. And my mother was very strict, and at times I felt like I got to get out of this house because I'm not going to know what it is to live. And, my mother, I developed very early. And so I think that bothered my mother too. Like, I started getting everything that women get early, and guys was hitting on me, and I was like, wow, this is interesting. I want to see what this is all about.
And you mentioned that you didn't really feel comfortable having those kind of conversations. So maybe you didn't have all that stuff to go off of.
It was no way I could have those conversations with my mom. She didn't even want boys calling the house. And even when it was innocent, she didn't want boys calling the house, So it was like, it was hurtful. And then I did have some after effects of the divorce. Even though my father was around, my mother remarried. And I felt, she was so into this marriage that I felt like, I felt like I didn't have her the same way, And, me and my grandmother have always been close. I was raised with my grandma. So I would spend a lot of time with my grandma, when I was young. And my grandma lived upstairs from me. So I would always go, yeah. So it's easy. I was always upstairs with my grandmother. And, so it was just a hard kind of like, harsh childhood, and I felt like, who am I going to talk to? Who am I going to turn to if I need, some help or direction?
So if you ran away, what was that like? Were you staying at your house and living at your house and sneaking out? Or did you actually like take things and then leave for days at a time?
Yes. So I took things and left for a week at a time, days at a time. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I have a funny story actually. Yeah. So it started out with me running away when I was like 10 or 11. And my mother was like, why did you run away? And she was so devastated. And she found me that same day. But, and I did it as a rebellion. Like, I can't live in this house with you anymore. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're crazy, lady. You're trying to kill me. I'm not your students you deal with at your school, I was never even built like that, I was never raised like that. And so, so basically it started out like that. And then it became like, it's something about, I would say, about the streets that when you get used to the streets, it makes you fearless, And so when you meet people in the streets and you start hanging out with street people, they make you feel like you can jump over a moving train and still live,
Yeah. So what does that mean? Get used to the streets, like be comfortable out there by yourself and talking to people and interacting with strangers.
Out there by yourself, interacting with people, because I wasn't a street girl, but me being out there, with people who were from the streets and who were, hood people, because that's what happens when you're out there. You just get more comfortable. You begin to be like, wait a minute, I'm fearless too, because you got to do what they do, So it became a big, I changed. It changed me. So it started when I was 11, and then it just got more progressive as I got older. I ran away all the way until, I basically got out of high school. I graduated high school at 16. And actually, I have a funny story. I went out the country one time, and my mom signed up, but I couldn't get back in because I had all these missing reports on me from the times I used to run away. Yeah. So, yeah, I was a difficult, looking back, I was a difficult teenager with reason, but I was also a good student. Like I stayed on the honor roll. I was, very smart. Like I said, I graduated at 16 years old. But I changed. And then I went through a situation where I was raped / molested when I got like 12, 13.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And it kind of like, that also did something to me because
of course it
numb. I was numb to it. And it was a guy that I went to church with. So,
wow.
Yes. So that did something to me, and it just pushed me further out there in the streets. Like, look, you can't beat me no more because I'm going to beat you, like I'm crazy now for real, My curiosity turned into something that was, unmanageable after a while.
What did your mom and your dad say? I mean, the first time that you ran away, your mom came and found you, and obviously she was not happy. And then you kept doing it. Did she, punish you? Did you take stuff away? Did your dad get involved?
Yeah, she tried to do. Of course, my dad was a cop. He would have everybody looking for me.
Yeah.
My mom, how could she punish me? Really, I was a reader. I didn't do anything. She couldn't say, she couldn't say, you're not going to that party. Because I didn't party. I didn't do anything. So I became like numb to her punishments, and that's the thing about being an only child and not having, you know how to stay to yourself, and, you know how to make your own fun. So it wasn't like anything that she could really do to punish me, but she would try, of course. She would be like very upset. My mother believed in spanking. So, I got a couple, but after a while, I was like, you can't spank me no more. Like, what you going to do? I'm going to go back out there, as soon as I get a chance, I'm going, especially. So she had to find another tactic. I will say that there are some things that really saved I think now I looking back, saved my life. One of my best friends, and actually sometimes I would just be right around the corner up the block, but because everybody knew my mother was so strict, they would tell her, no, she's not here. We don't know where she is, because they felt bad for me,
They got your back.
Yes, they had my back. And, yeah, so I had best friends that really looked out for me, and their family loved me. So I can always stay with them. If things got rough, they became like my family. So I stayed a lot of times with my best friend. And I had a lot of women that really just took an interest in me and felt like I was important and smart. And so no matter what I did, they were like, look, we love her. We got to do whatever we can to save her, So I think that did save my life in a lot of instances. I look back and I was in a lot of crazy, sticky situations that really could have got me in some trouble, and I'm just happy that, I just got out in the nick of time, or something happened where it gave me a check, like, you got to get out of here, or this is not a, comfortable place to be in. So I'm grateful for that.
Do any of those specific situations come to mind?
Yeah. One time me and my girlfriend decided she was seeing this drug dealer guy, and we went to his building, and, she wanted me to come along with her, and I came along and I was there, but I didn't feel comfortable, And I was like, I'm getting out of here. And she was like, no, just stay with me. And I was like, no, something. And so she was, I felt comfortable because the guy had a lot of guys around, and it was just an eerie feeling, and everybody was kind of like doing their thing. And so I kind of slipped out a back door, here I am, a teenager. I just got a check in my spirit. Something wasn't right. I slipped out the back door, and then like maybe an hour later, she was arrested. They did a drug bust in the house. Yes, one of her friends, guy tried to sleep with her. So it was just a whole bunch of mess that went down. So, yeah.
Sounds like you got out of there at the right time.
Yeah, I got a couple of stories like that. So I did. I got her in the nick of time. Yes.
I don't want to push you too hard, but are there any other ones? You said you got a couple of stories. You're piquing my interest here. I'm very curious. What other?
Well, that was one that I definitely remember because it's like, like, oh my God, this is going to be, a real situation. But I would say another story that really got me was, let's see. I was actually a part of a situation one time when one of my best friends, she had became a stripper. And she was like telling me about her situation. She was like, listen, can you just come with me? I can make a lot of money, but I need, I need somebody there with me who I know can watch my back. And I was like, okay, I'll come with you the time, And, she had started to get out there and I was really like living a different life. That wasn't my thing, So I went with her, and then the guy asked her to come back to his house, and she wanted me to come with her. And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. I don't even know this guy, And she wound up going. Matter of fact, I had to find a way home because we were all the way out like near the Bronx. And she went, and it was just, she came back. He had beat her up, the whole nine. So,
oh no.
Yeah. And I told her, I was like, you need to come home with me. You don't know this guy. And he had some other friends with him. So I just felt like it wasn't right. So yeah, that was another situation. Mm-hmm.
It sounds like the moral there is you got to listen to yourself. It's a good thing that in both of those cases, you thought this doesn't real feel right. I'm going to leave, and you left, right?
Yes, exactly.
And were both of these before 16, or did these happen later after you graduated?
No. These are all before 16. We're talking about 14, 15. No, maybe me at 14, because I went to college at 16. Maybe 16 too. I did 16. I went to college almost when I was almost about to turn 17. So, it was, 16 and 17. Yeah, pretty young. I went to my first club. I'll never forget it. It was the club that was popular was the Tunnel. And I'm forgetting another one, but I went to the first club, me and my best friend, when I was 13, 14,
Wow.
Yes, because that's how it was in the city. You could get in, fake ID. Nobody was really checking, the Tunnel was one. I forgot the other name of the one, but they were very popular at the time. And
what is that like? What is that like as a 13, 14-year-old? I'm assuming this is like early 90s.
This is, let's see. Yeah, 90s. Yeah, 14. Maybe I was 14, maybe not 13, 14. It was, everybody there was around my age, 15. So, I don't know if everybody.
Gosh.
No, I won't say everybody, but you would say
a
majority
lot
of people. Yeah. And then, I was never into drinking or drugs or any of that. That was never my thing. But, I danced all night. I felt like, I was like, this is what people do? I'm alive. But the funny thing is, it's like, yay. Funny thing about that is, though, right now, I will not step foot in a club, because I'm like, I've done it, been there, done it, I will go, but, I'm not a clubber. Some people do that every weekend. That's never been my thing. Yeah.
Sure. It's not as interesting and new and exciting as it was when you were 13.
No.
So you graduated at 16. That's impressive. How did you graduate early? You were just really good at school?
I would say I was more persistent than I was smart. I wanted to get out of my mother's house.
Yeah, understand.
Yeah, and so I just took advanced courses. And so by the time my mother told me, so actually a funny story, my mom told the counselor that I could not graduate early. That was her thing. She said, no, I'm not going to, because she's not ready, But by the time everything came out, I had finished high school. I had finished all my coursework. There was no way that they could keep me back. What were they going to do? And I had signed my mother's name on papers. I had enrolled in college. Yes. And everything.
That's funny.
Yeah. So she was like, oh, well, I guess if she got into a school, we'll take her to college,
So it was almost like it's too late now for her to say no, because you've already signed the stuff for her. So what's she going to do?
Exactly.
So you finished high school at 16. You go to college. Did you leave? Did you have to stay with your mom for a couple of years later? Or did you actually end up moving out on your own and going to college?
Yeah, I lived on the dorms. Me and my best friend, the one that I told you I spent the most time with, we went to the same college. We were roommates for the first year.
Very cool.
Yeah, and we went to Lincoln University. Funny story, the first year I partied so much that I failed out. Can you believe it?
Oh,
yes,
no.
I bombed out, but I transferred to another college before I was able to. I felt like I was, I was 16 in college. I was having the time of my life. I was not under my parents anymore. I didn't have to run away. Actually, I was just could do what I want to do. It was like a dream come true.
And where was Lincoln University at?
It's in Pennsylvania. It's like in not near the city at all. It's in its own little country place, Lincoln University, Pennsylvania.
So you got a bunch of distance between you and your parents. You're off on your own. You're 16. You're with your best friend in a dorm. Of course, I can understand how you fail out.
Yes, I failed out my first year, but I managed to graduate on time. I transferred to another university it was called Beaver College at that time. Now it's called Arcadia University, but it was called Beaver College. And I graduated on time. So I'm really excited about that. It was, I knew what I needed. It was a different structure, not a party school. Mainly, the only change was that it was a culture shock for me because I went from all African-American homogeneous kind of community all my life to now a white one, where I was the minority. So that was a big change.
Was it like that at Lincoln as well as Arcadia?
No, Lincoln is a HBCU. So it was mostly African-American or a Black school. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so obviously that amount of freedom was difficult to deal with because it led to you, needing to transfer to another school and go into another environment. But what was it like 16, moving away from this household where things are very strict and regimented to total freedom? Right. What's that like the first, week or whatever you get there and it's just you and your best friend. You can do whatever you want. And you're off on your own.
The funny thing is, because I had run away so much, I was used to the freedom, it wasn't like it didn't feel new to me because, you just
didn't have to sneak it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I just didn't have to sneak it anymore. I was on campus, and it was the freedom that came with, being on campus and really trying to, get to know people. I guess if anything, the experience that was different from me was that, I had a core circle of friends, like my best friend, Tiffany, was my roommate. She was the one I grew up with, and so now I had to get to, I kind of, had to get to know other people. And I don't know if I was really good about that. I've always been a loner in my own way and really eccentric in a different way also. Getting acclimated to being in a community of people and making friends. I don't know if that was that easy for me at first,
So you mentioned that Lincoln, you were around, it was a HSBC college, is that right?
It's an HBCU college.
HBCU.
Yep,
I'm sorry. HSBC is the financial institution.
Yes.
I don't know where my head is. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
It was an HBCU college, but when you went to Arcadia, all of a sudden you're in a new environment, right?
Yes, all white university. Yes.
What is that like? What, you're 17 at that time?
Yes, I'm 17.
And you're in this brand new environment with all white people. What's going on? What are you thinking? What's that like?
Oh my goodness. It was a culture shock. The thing that I did like is that I got to travel while I was in college to different countries. But it was a culture shock because for the most part, it was maybe 10 of us on campus by that time, 10 Black people on campus. So we stuck together. We were really like maybe 10, 15 Black people in the whole school.
Out of how big's the school?
It's a pretty huge, it was a small campus, but it's still thousands of students.
Okay.
Maybe 1,000 or something. Yeah.
That's a very small minority.
Yes, maybe 10, 15 of us. We would count it. We would count us.
You knew each other.
We knew each other. We went to each other's dorms, It was a culture shock because, you realize then that, and let me just say that this is also about the importance of the diverse experience of Black people, is that some people were used to that because maybe a small minority of us Black people, maybe 3 or 4 of us, were used to being around all white people because that's the way they grew up. But for the majority of us, we came from Black communities, it was a culture shock and we stuck together. We kind of labeled the teachers that we thought were racist. I even had my own experience there where I felt like, ostracized because I was different, and
In a class?
In the class. Yes. Because, when you have a different experience than other people in the campus, some professors look down on that. They don't, why are you speaking with the ebonics that you speak? Are you saying that? That's not the way you talk. And that's not academic. And, my experience didn't matter. And, who I wasn't really relevant. And I didn't write like everybody else. And I didn't want to study Shakespeare. I'm an English major, but Shakespeare wasn't my favorite writer, So it's a different type of culture. Here I am. I'm coming from a homogeneous Black community. I loved Maya Angelou and Toni Morrison, and I got to read about people that I knew, Malcolm X, and so people, James Baldwin, and of course later on in life, I began to love, I love all writers, of all different cultures because I, studied them, Emily Dickinson and Jane Austen and so many other great writers that I love, Pedro Pietre but Amy Tan, but at that time, because I was from a all Black education system, I learned about my own people, my own culture. We read books about that. And so coming there, it wasn't valued in that academic culture, institution and culture. So I did feel ostracized many times.
And were you an English major from when you transferred?
Yes, English and theater. I was actually English and theater when I transferred. Yes. And I guess that was part of the problem too with theater. I will never forget we did a play, and it was a George Orwell play, and not George Orwell. His name is George, but I'm forgetting. But it was a play by African American, and it kind of stereotyped like nappy hair and straight hair. It was by African American, supposed to be funny, but it's funny with it. It's called the Colored Museum. That's the name of it, the Colored Museum. And she wanted me to play the role, and it was like, it was nappy hair versus a straight hair, and we were wigs, right? And to me, I was like, this is inappropriate for me to play this at a white school. Like, among Black people, we can laugh at our own stuff. But, I felt like it was inappropriate. So, there was those kind of clashes that happened,
But did you have to go through with it, or were you able to say,
Yes, I had to go through with it. Those are the kind of, yeah. Right. I mean, I had a goal was to get out. So, I was at the end actually of my education in college, and my goal was graduate, so, yeah, actually, and one of the things that I talk about too is that I had a professor, my only Black professor I had the whole time I was at Beaver College, Jane Splon. She reinvigorated me. She saved my life. She came in, she taught this English class, the ethnic literature class. So we learned about all different literatures, like I had learned about when I was growing up. And she valued me so much. And she, she said, the people here, they talk bad about you, but you know what? I'm going to get you through this.
That's fantastic.
And, you're going to, yes. And I will never forget her for that. I really appreciate her.
Yeah. Sometimes even just one person can really support you and keep you going. Yeah.
Yes. And so my career in life has been like that. I always had these angels in my life that have kind of helped me and guided my whole, trajectory of life. So I appreciate that.
So you got out of your mom's house and you went to college, and then you transferred to Beaver. And it sounds like you had a similar mentality where you're like, I got to finish. I got to get out of here.
Yes.
Where was the next get out? Where did you think you were going to go after college? What were you going to do?
I went straight to my master's degree. So I never stopped. I went back home. I went back to Brooklyn. So funny story. I graduated from Beaver College, went back home. I got my first job at TIAA Crawford. No, wait a minute. But let me back up. Before I got that job, while I was in my last year of college, I worked for Vanguard. So I was working and going to school. And then when I graduated, I was able to get a job for it was called TIAA CREF at that time. Now it's just TIAA. But it was TIAA CREF, and I got hired as a writer, and I'm 21 years old, making like $49,000.
Wow.
I thought I was rich.
Yeah.
Yes, I was doing really good. I was like, oh, this is the life, and I mean, listen, if I could go back, I would save half of that money. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, you don't realize what you had until it's gone. But making $50,000 at this company. And really, matter of fact, the people that I've met at that company are still my close friends. So
that's good.
You, I still have long. Yeah, my boss, Alice Oceans, a Jewish white woman. I still love her. Her son, I went to his bar mitzvah a couple of years ago. Yeah, we stay close. And her secretary is like I call her like my second mother. And my friend, yes, I still stay close. And actually, being a young, smart, Black woman, in corporate America as a writer, being hired as a writer was a big thing,
What is a writer?
Yeah.
What are you writing?
I wrote, so I wrote a couple of different things. First, I was in a financial department. So we wrote financial statements. We wrote all the financial letters. We did books for investors, things like that. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. All those letters from the CEO, they don't write those letters. We do.
I understand.
He just signs them.
Yeah. And did you enjoy that? Was it fun, or were you just like, "Hey, I'm making $50,000. I'm young 20s.
Yes.
This is just..."
Well. Let me tell you, TI Aircraft, when I joined, it was fun because they used to throw. I think that was the culture of the times, though, because back in those days, they used to have real good parties, like end of the year parties. We got end of the year big bonuses, And so, we took lunch. And that time you can go to Wendy's and get a whole meal for $4.
Yeah.
Remember that? Yeah. So I enjoyed it. And then I met some very cool people. They helped me go to get my master's. So I got a master's from LIU in English.
So you got the master's while you were working at the job. Okay.
Yes, I did. Yeah. Yes, I went to my master's at LIU in English, and it was just a great time. Now, I didn't like per se what I was doing because it was boring at times. You work with a lot of lawyers, and they're very technical about written language, right? Don't use if, use and. Every little thing, come. And the industry has changed. A lot of it started to move into like copywritten language instead of really creative kind of language. And, I'm more into the humanized effect of things. And, so it wasn't my ideal career. But one thing I did right was that I started teaching part-time while I was working because I knew I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life at Mega Evers College in Brooklyn. And they gave me an opportunity to teach there, my first ever college job. And I loved it. And I was like, this is what I got to do.
Teaching
for the rest of my life. Yes.
Fantastic. So you discovered it. And how did you find the teaching job? Did it just come out of nowhere, or how did you?
Well, no, not really. My stepmother knew the president at the time, and I had a master's in English studies. I was like, hey, can I just be an adjunct? It was an adjunct. So that means I was only teaching 1 or 2 classes. And they were like, sure. So that's basically what happened. I became an adjunct there, and I taught there for about a year. I said, this is what I want to do for my life. 2 years. Yeah. And so I kind of worked my way. I was still working TI Craft because that was paying my bread and butter. That was, by the time I left there, I was making $60,000. I stayed there for 5 years, maybe a little bit more than that. And I always think if I stayed in corporate America, I could have been making 3 times as much as I'm making right now, maybe 4 times. I could have been the CEO somewhere. But you know what? This is why I tell my students, do what you love, not what pays, because doing what you love will always make you feel happier. And
silly question. What is an adjunct professor?
Oh, okay. An adjunct professor is someone who's not on the payroll full time. They're only a part-time.
So you discover this thing, you're working part-time, paying the bills with the TIAA job, but you're thinking, I got to do this. This is the job I want, right?
Yes.
How does the transition work? So you said you work for TIAA for about 5 years and you're making really good money when you leave. Do they eventually offer you a full-time position at the school and you say, yes, I want to take it, and then you transition, or?
No. So I worked at Mega Evers, and then I worked at Borough Manhattan Community College. Actually the funny thing is about that is that I went to turmoil. I had a, child within that time. And I was I had just met my child's, kind of like as a single mother because my child's father wasn't involved. And so, and then by the time I left TIAA, I went for another master's in communication.
Oh,
So
wow.
I have so I have two master's degrees.
A master's in English and a master's in communication?
Yes, a master's in communication.
Wow.
And I was also dating someone I went to high school with, and I was really at a turmoil stage because the relationship was really up and down. You know, he had cheated on me a couple times. I got pregnant by him. We had a son. And so now I had two children, and in this kind of crazy up and down relationship with this guy who I was in love with, but wasn't sure if he was good husband material, you know?
Yeah.
And so I thought that maybe if I left, so by the time I left TIAA, I'll never forget it. It was May 5th, which is the Revolutionary Day. And I left there and I was like, let's move. I told my at the time boyfriend, we did get married later on, that I wanted to move and just start anew because I was just in so much pain about everything that went on, you know, in our relationship. I said, let's just start anew. I had two children. He really was helping me raise my daughter also, even though that wasn't his child. And we had this son together, and they were 2 years apart at the time. They were pretty young. And I said, let's move. And he said, where you want to go? We had visited Texas. And so we liked it. Everything was cheaper there. And we said, let's go to Dallas, Texas. And that's what happened. We moved and stayed about 4 years in Dallas, Texas.
So you're coming from the East Coast. You live on the East Coast your whole life, and then you move to Dallas. What is that like?
Oh, my gosh. That's a culture shock.
Yeah.
Don't do it. No. Actually, I have a couple of stories that's going to make you laugh. So the first story is, when I first came to Dallas, we went to the store and this lady came up to me and she was like, hi. And I looked at, you know, his name was Mitch and he was my boyfriend at the time. I was like, what is wrong with that lady? You know, and they were like, well, we're in the South. People speak to each other. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, very funny. And then another thing is that one of the reasons we also moved to Texas is because I had gotten a job to teach a high school down there, Carter High School. And so I thought, okay, this is perfect. But what I didn't know about Texas is that they don't pay a lot. You know, so I went from this big, huge salary to nothing. And then the program I was in, they were taking like $800 a month out of my check.
For
because,
what?
Yeah, to pay for the program. I know. And the healthcare is so terrible there that you pay most of your health care there. So, I mean, I was bringing home, and you only get paid once a month. Oh, that's another thing. So I was bringing home like $1,000 once a month.
That's insane.
So it's crazy. Learning how to manage that was ridiculous. And at that time, when we moved to Texas, I had these two kids. I was engaged. I had gotten engaged to my boyfriend, my fiance, and he was, he was a philanderer at the time. That was hard. And he it was hard. He didn't keep a job. He was off and on with jobs. So, Texas was hard for me. But the good part about Texas is that I did get a job working for a community college eventually. I did leave the high school. I got a full-time job in a community college and met some amazing people who I'm still friends with today.
So were you teaching in Brooklyn and in Texas? Were you teaching English or were you teaching various?
English.
Okay.
English, yes.
And how was it going from college in Brooklyn, teaching college, to teaching high school?
That was totally different because, in college, you only deal with students for the most part. But in high school, you're dealing with parents. And it was stressful. Let me tell you something. This is a referendum on education. It is totally different when you teach in certain schools than when you teach in other schools.
I can imagine.
Because no, I'm serious, because they always say the better school should get the money. Well, guess what? Take those teachers out if they're so good and put them in the hood and let them teach these kids.
Yeah.
No, and it's no reward. It's a thankless job. I had students that came to me that could only read on a 5th grade level. Now they're in the 9th grade. But if I bring them up to the 7th grade, I don't get credit for that because they're not reading the 9th grade level, even though I brought grades levels, So it's just very hard. And then I remember that the resources was such lacking. This is when I realized that there's a disparity in education, for certain geographics and certain ethnicities of people, for marginalized communities. Because they would send us books. I had 30 students in my class. They sent me 15 books. So my students couldn't even take the book home to read it. What am I supposed to do with that?
That is crazy.
Yeah, it was just so bad.
What was the demographic of the high school that you were teaching in? Like what kind of neighborhood?
All African American.
And what kind of neighborhood was it in?
Oak Cliff, Dallas, Texas, which is the, kind of, all Black community, of Dallas. And, I remember taking my students on the field trips to try to take it. They had never been to Fort Worth. They had never been to downtown Dallas. Some of my students had never been to see a play. So, because they, it's real issues when you're dealing with students who, lack resource or lack, I remember calling one time, calling a parent, and the parent couldn't even control the child. I left there, remember, with headaches, stress, like, God, what am I going to do? I got to get these students to learn, but they were dealing with family issues. A lot of them being raised by their grandmother. I had students that had kids in ninth grade,
Oh my gosh.
were raising children. Yes. I had students with kids, brothers and sisters. I had students that were just dealing with all kinds of things, their parents in jail, and so even though the school was supposed to be a famous school, it's one of those schools that were featured in Friday Night Lights, the football. So it was they were really heavily focused on the football program, which can be problematic in itself, Yeah, especially when you need academics to be able. There's a lot of pressure on teachers and excellent teachers in the school who really, really cared about the kids, but sometimes it could feel thankless because of what was going on. And then me being under stress with my family and not getting paid a lot. It was a stressful time.
I want to know what that's like. So you go from making a considerably high amount of money to making a very low amount of money. You've got your 2 children. You've got your fiance who's there, but he's also kind of doing whatever he's doing.
Oh, yes.
And you have these kids who are your life, right? You're teaching them. You care about them. They're going through all this stuff. What does Chalet at that point in time feel like? What is your life like when you've just got all this stuff going on and you're getting paid once a month trying to figure out how do I stretch this for my family and myself, and just, what's that like for you?
Oh my God. I remember feeling so stressed. It was like a roller coaster, because there were times that I was like, God, I don't know how we're going to pay the rent this month and my car note, and groceries, and, depending on what month it was, my husband or my fiance may have had a job, may not have had a job. And he was not, he was young, so he was concerned about having fun, and we often clash because, he wanted to have fun, and he was, very popular in the community, and he wanted to throw parties, and he was out there, and here I am, like, okay, is the light bill going to be paid? Like, is our lights going to get shut off this week? And that was the reality of my situation, because our lights did get shut off. We did have to move from apartment to apartment. Literally, we never were able to do our lease because I was struggling.
You're worried about paying for the lights and the food, and then you got someone next to you who's like, let's throw a party. It's like, we don't have any lights on for this party.
And he was, literally, I'm telling you, I know how stress can affect you because I was angry. I was not a nice person. I was the person that you see now who's laughing and full of joy and happy. That was not who I was. I was always mad. He was a big time philanderer, so he would mess with people in our communities, and it was embarrassing to me, and I was embarrassed and I was upset with him, but really loved him and really wanted to make the relationship work, and then I'm trying to be a fine Christian and, going to church and keeping my kids in church and, at times having to change babysitters and, oh my God, because I'm like, how am I going to pay for daycare? He also told me that, like, oh, I'm not paying. I'm not watching the kids. That's not my responsibility. Even when he didn't have a job. So now I got to find a way to pay for daycare. So it was just so stressful. I remember feeling like, oh my God, like, what am I going to do?
The weight of the world on you.
Oh, yes. Yes. I really, to tell you the truth, I look back and I'm like, I don't know how I made it, but I did. I will say that I did belong to TD Jakes Church, which was lifesaver for me. It really helped me at times when I was feeling down. And I will also say that I had a community of people that began to love me, because in the beginning, he was this, it could be very deceptive because he was this very sociable guy. Everybody loved him. He was the life of the party. and I look like this angry woman,
Right.
this angry Black woman,
Yeah.
and so people were like, what's wrong with your wife? She eventually got married, and I couldn't explain, like, I'm holding on by a thread.
A lot of stuff going on. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of stuff. But everything gets exposed, because I must say that years later, some of those same people are now my closest friends, and they're like, Chalet, I see what you was going through, because they began to see it for themselves, and it was, gosh, so it was hard.
All that stuff's going on. You got the weight of the world on your shoulders. What changes? How does your situation develop? What happens?
Yeah. So I would say two things happened. The first thing that happened was one for the worse, and one was that I left him. So there was a time in the middle of a relationship that I just felt like I was like broken. I was broken a lot of times in that relationship, I must say, but I was really at a broken space, and I left, and I almost actually got remarried, almost divorced him and got remarried, but he came back and, said he had changed. And so we got back together. And then I think even when that brief separation, it showed me that, we were in Texas by ourselves. So let me just make clear this, like, it was just me, him, and the kids,
No family.
So I left no all my friends that I knew, all my family, I was isolated, and because I was a very private person, the only people I could tell when I was going through stuff was my family, and they got tired of it. They were like, you better get out of here. You know what I'm saying? It was crazy. And my grandmother was like, oh no, it's ridiculous, but my mother was more like, hey, let's see what happens. You know what I'm saying? With the relationship, but it just kept on going downhill. So that little separation, even though we did get back together, really showed me that I had the capability to take care of myself, to really be alone for, you know what I'm saying, if I needed to. But when we got back together, I got pregnant, and the funny thing is that I got pregnant, and I had lost 2 children before that, so I suffered from 2 miscarriages.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and it was a big loss for me. I remember, and I started going through counseling because I felt like I was losing my mind, and she was like, you just experienced too much loss and too much grief, and then at that time, the job that I was working at, they decided not to rehire me. So I had to find a place. So I left, and I decided to go to Virginia Beach. Now, I said, I was like, I got to get out of here. Now, my purpose for going to Virginia Beach was I got this job at community college that I could work at. And then I was also going to work at OG, which gave me a job as a part-time adjunct instructor there. So I was going to work both of those jobs to try to, make ends meet.
Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Yes, Virginia Beach, Virginia. So I left Texas and went to Virginia Beach, Virginia. And I was pregnant then that time. And actually, the funny thing is, when I went there, I was like, I'm going to do it just by myself with my kids. But I had an incident in which I hired this company to move my furniture from Texas, and they scammed me. There's a lot of that going on. Yeah, they tried to get more money after they quoted, Yeah,
I've heard of those.
So I had to get my husband. Yes, a lot of them. You got to be careful. I had to get my husband the furniture, and that's how we wound up staying together. And so, and in Virginia Beach, his nephew, his uncle, who was also around his same age, lived there with his then wife. His uncle has passed away since now, and a tragic, God bless the rest in peace. But at that time, they lived there, and they were like, a couple that we can hang out with, and so we babysat their kids, they babysat our kids, so we could have date nights. But that was another kind of crazy situation.
When you decided to move to Virginia Beach, you and your husband were separated, right?
No, we were still, I was pregnant, so we were still trying to,
You were trying to make it work.
We were trying to make it work, right?
So is that how you decided on Virginia Beach? Was that he had family there? Or where does Virginia Beach come in? You're from Brooklyn, and then you moved to Texas.
Yeah.
How do you decide on Virginia Beach?
I know. So basically, I just wanted to get out of Texas. It just was like, even now when I go and I think about going back to Texas, it's so many bad memories there. It just hell I went through. And then I was like, I got to get out of here. And I got that job offer in Virginia Beach to work for ODU and a community college. So I said, okay, I'm there.
So you got an offer that took you there.
Yes, totally. And we found a nice little house and everything. And he got a job there eventually.
And so what was life like in Virginia Beach? Were you getting paid better than you were in Texas? Did you find the community?
No, that was a struggle. So basically, 2 adjunct professors don't get paid any money because it's part-time. So you really have to teach a lot of classes and hope your classes don't get canceled, to really make it work. So it was still a struggle. Matter of fact, at that time, I even had gotten Medicaid because I didn't have any medical insurance. You don't get medical insurance being an adjunct, just because I was having a baby. And but my husband did get a job, and it wasn't. He had a pretty good income for the most part. Working at military housing before he got let go. And I think the whole time we was in Virginia Beach, so he did have like that. We were only there for a year. So he did have that job for the year. I have family actually because my mother's from Virginia Beach in Norfolk area. So I did have family. That made it livable. I liked Virginia Beach actually. It was cool to me. And I like the and the beaches and stuff. That's important for me. But and the weather, it was the thing about Virginia Beach. When it rained in Virginia Beach or there was a storm, we wouldn't have lights for like days.
Wow.
Yeah, but I will say that it was a good experience because I had a support system there.
Yeah, that's
and
important.
It wasn't so far away, and I loved the house. So we had a nice little house. And then I met some of my neighbors was best people, very sweet, and we became very close with them. I'm still close with them to this day.
Wow, that's so nice.
I say, yeah. And so it did. The support system made it, so much better.
Yeah, but you're only there for a year.
Yeah, I was only there for a year. I was struggling to make ends meet. I had this baby that I had just had, and I applied for another job, and I called for Manassas to work at Northern Virginia Community College, and that's where I'm at. I've been there ever since 2011.
And so you're in Northern Virginia Community College, and you got this job. I'm assuming you're teaching English, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, English and communications. So I teach both because I had that communication degree. Yeah.
How was it when you got there? Was it, much better? Because obviously you weren't an adjunct, right? You got an actual.
Oh, yes. Oh, my goodness. For the first time in my life, I had a salary.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, not my life, but the first time in years.
Right.
Remember, I
it had been some struggle.
Like a baller. Yeah. I started off semi-rich from what I thought to some struggle, And now at this point, I had 3 kids. Me and my husband and I, we're living in a nice house. But I think I would say things got better financially for a point, but then he would lose jobs. So the first house we got, he lost a job that I kind of depended on to be able to pay the mortgage. I mean, he was just, the ways never changed. It never stopped. And so I finally decided that I had to get out the relationship. So I left him when we were 6-7 months. So I've been a single mother ever since then. We talk. There were times that we still tried to work it out for many years after that. We went to counseling. We were still doing it as husband and wife. But he got another one pregnant, and I decided that was it. I couldn't do that anymore. Yeah.
That's understandable. Did he stay in the area? Did they end up moving?
No, he moved back to New York. Yes. That was the hardest part of everything because my kids suffered, because of that. Yeah, they missed their dad.
Yeah, it's difficult, right? But I mean,
yes.
You tried. You did what you could. So
I did, and I don't regret it because I will tell any woman, you don't have to subject yourself to certain abuse, pain. But, I was, and I, to tell you the truth, I went through 3 or 4 years of counseling just to realize that I didn't have to do that. That was, and so I take responsibility for what I caused by staying. Because when you stay, people think it's acceptable to be treated a certain way.
So you get this job. And it's steady and it's salaried. What's that like for the first time in however many years to have that sort of stability?
Oh, it was nice, except Northern Virginia is very expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was nice. I went through some years of still struggling, because like I said, before I actually separated from my husband, I depended on his income, and it was, his income was never really steady, you know? And I was in so much debt from past, not having, so it took me a while to rebound, to be honest, to get back on my feet. But it was experience. I'm telling you, the counseling helped me so much when I was really going through. And I just became my whole fan. Like everything that I thought I needed, I didn't actually need. Like you think you need somebody there with you. You think that you can't be alone. But actually sometimes, when you leave a toxic situation, it's better for you, to be, And so it really gave me faith, more faith in God to really just trust that I could do it. So that was, yeah.
At what point in that process, the years of teaching, do you think I want to write, something myself? I want to put something out there.
Oh, it's a good question. Actually, I've been writing all my life.
Yeah.
Funny story. Yeah, even when I was like a teenager, I used to write. The reason why I was so popular with people, I guess, when I did become popular I used to write poems to people, and they were like, oh, write me a poem about the situation. Like, oh, this is so good, So I was always writing with me, as a kid. I used to start these little like teenage magazines. Writing has always been my outlet. Matter of fact, before I left New York, I wrote a book called Black Dresses Stained.
Okay. And what is that book about?
It's a short story book. It's short stories and poetry about women that go through situations, women that's been abused and used. And some of it is my story, and some of it is just stories I have from women that I've, been close to and loved and seen what they went through, So I tell different tales, different perspectives. And that was very popular, among my little small, it was self-published, and, I think I sold a couple of 100 copies. So I was happy with that,
When you sold those copies, did it make you feel like I want to publish more? I like this.
Yes, I loved it. But let me tell you about being in distress. It's hard to write in distress,
You're trying to figure out how to make ends meet. You're probably not sitting there pumping out books.
Yeah. So actually, I didn't write another book until I got divorced. So you're talking about like 10 years down the road, 10, 11 years until I got to Manassas.
You get to Manassas, you have the stability. What's the next book? What do you write?
My next book was ReLive. That book came out when I finally went through my divorce. And actually, it came a little bit after my therapy, because I was writing part of that book. It has 4 steps. It talks about the death, the process of, and basically the whole theme is that you can go through a death, like kind of what I felt like I went through when I was in a marriage that I was so unhappy in, and feeling lost and feeling despair. Something happened to me in Manassas. I caught my husband in bed with another woman. And that and him having a baby by another woman was like the last straw for me. And when I did that, I blacked out. Me and him got into a physical altercation. You never know what you would do if you catch somebody that you love in bed with somebody else. Let me just say that.
It's just too many emotions.
Yes, too many emotions. And so I got depressed. I thought I was lose everything, lose my job, everything I worked, because I got arrested. And thank God I was able to beat the case. It didn't turn out to be anything. But I had to pay a lawyer thousands of dollars to get off of that, and but it was, so basically when that happened, it was the online paper that picked up that story. So it was a public story that I had caught, and it didn't even say my husband, which was bad. It said I assaulted a man in a hotel with another woman.
Yeah.
Not saying, and they put a wrong age. They said he was 25 or something, so it made it look really bad. And so, it was embarrassing for me, because my name, my picture was in the paper. I was looking like, I had just come out of a brawl,
Yeah, it's usually not a good picture that they put in the paper for you.
No. Yeah. And so it was very embarrassing. And I thought about that my life didn't have any value. I thought about that everything was over. Everything that I worked for was going to be over in an instance. And at one point I was like, maybe I should just end my life,
Oh, no.
But I remember being so down and depressed and like in a dark place, and my daughter got ill, and that kind of snapped me out of it.
Yeah.
Yes, that snapped me out of it. I never forget that. So I know that was God working in serious ways.
How did it snap you out of it? Was it you caring for your daughter and seeing her in this precarious situation?
Yes, exactly what it was. I realized that I wasn't the only one, that my daughter was pain also, and seeing her in that situation made me realize that I had to live for her, and for my other kids, and I had to be strong, and I had to, whatever I was feeling about the situation, I had to heal myself because she was watching me.
She was, and depending on you.
And depending on me. And if I don't get this right, my kids can be damaged forever, And so this is the reason why I went to counseling, because now it wasn't just about me. I know I had to live for them. I had to really live for them. And so I know that was God's situation, using my daughter to really shake me up too, to be like, all right, Chalet, get it together. You got people depending on you. And let me tell you something. I have lived life to the fullest when I made the decision that I would never be in that place again. I have smiled. I have really laughed when I was in my marriage. I didn't laugh really. I didn't take any pictures of myself because I didn't believe I was beautiful. My self-esteem suffered, and there were just things I stopped doing. Like, I'm a music lover, but I didn't really enjoy that anymore. And I didn't realize how angry and how much, bitter I was getting, and how something had eaten away at my joy slowly. That's why I call it the death. And that's why the name of the book is ReLive, because it was my process of really having to relive,
I mean, that's really beautiful to capture such a metamorphosis of yourself and of your, values and everything in a work of art like that.
Yeah. So that's a poetry book. So that was what that was.
So you have a book of poetry that you've released, and you have a book of short stories that you released years before. Are there more books, or there's one specific that you emailed me about, but I'm curious how many others. It sounds like you're a very prolific author.
Oh, yes. I have another book called Black from Scratch. And it's basically, this is a different type of project, but it basically profiles over 85 Black people and their stories. And it has photography. It's a coffee table book, actually. So it has their picture in it. We did photography, photo shoots for people, amazing people, everyday people. You could be your neighbor next door with these great stories of resilience and perseverance. They overcome. And that was so important to me because when you look at my story, right? I had my story so diverse. You can't look at me and tell I had that crazy story to tell,
No.
that I had some real life experiences that really could have shaped me. It could have went differently for me. I could have been in a different place so many times, and I give credit to God for just, I'm a Christian. So I really give credit to God for saving my life and for people who have really been there for me, to help me, overcome situations. Cause I do think it takes community, but by doing this book, it shows that like Black people have diverse experiences, and they're not all the same, but they're no less powerful, than one from another, and so they'll talk about overcoming tragedies. We have married couples in there, wisdom for newlyweds in there, wisdom for like people that have overcome professional tragedies and personal tragedies or personal stories, or epiphanies that people have. Like they have a section that says what I would tell my 12-year-old self, So it's, I love stories and getting people's stories. And I think when you get people's authentic stories, you can help heal communities and people that's going through the same thing. Because so many times we think we're isolated in our own story, and that's just not the truth.
Well, I can safely say I love stories as well.
Yes.
You explained the catalyst for the ReLive book that you put out. Where did you get this idea for Black from Scratch?
Black from Scratch, actually, I've been doing stories for a long time. So even with my students in Texas, when I was teaching in Texas, I did this Tell Someone Else's Story project. Now I brought that over to Northern Virginia Community College, or NOVA as you know it, right? Now we still do that. I still do that in NOVA with my students, but it's a Tell Someone Else's Story project. And basically the reason why I came up with this idea, because I'm from Brooklyn, New York. Everybody there has a great story. Somebody, just being from New York itself is a story in itself, right? Especially in the times that we grew up. I grew up, and in the times when I was teaching, everybody, even my they had these amazing stories, But when I moved Texas, it was like I was like one of the few Black professors at this campus I used to work at in Hurst, Texas. So when I told my students, tell your own story or give me a narrative, they didn't really have anything to put. They were giving me these fluffy stories, about their dog that died. Or, not saying that that's not significant, but
right, I understand.
They didn't have any real life experiences, and so I decided, okay, listen, forget about you telling your own story. Let's tell someone else's story. So this is where this idea came up. And I would take my students to like these rehab centers and refugee sites, and I would have them interview people and tell their story. And so not only did the students exceeded value in it, or, sometimes we went to the shelter, depends. But then they learn, oh my God, there are people that's not like me. They're going through different situations, and so I've continued that tradition even now. During the fall semester, I teach a class that's dedicated to service learning. So they have to tell someone else's story and give service in return for getting the story.
Where did you get the inspiration for the title of the book?
Black from Scratch?
Yeah. So from scratch, what's the significance?
Oh, yes, that's a good one. Actually, I didn't come up with that name, Black from Scratch. Someone else did. An old friend was like, yeah, I think this is Black from Scratch. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. Just like, but, Black from Scratch, meaning that you can't, it's original, you can't, everything comes from Black,
How did you determine how many stories you wanted to include? Because obviously you could tell millions, right? I mean, there's so many of them. How do you choose the number?
Well, I wanted the books to be a thick kind of coffee table. And I'm actually working on another project that's hopefully we'll have a part 2 to that, where we can tell more stories. And I'm working on another project that's going to tell different kinds of stories. But like you, Corey, I love storytelling. I think it's important. And I think that not enough people tell their stories for different reasons. And the reason why I decided to focus on Black people at this time is because I come from like a culture where people are sometimes afraid to tell their stories, or told that they shouldn't tell their stories, or are afraid to be vulnerable and tell some of the hard parts of their stories. And so that's something I encourage even in my own life. There are certain parts of my stories that still, if I talk about it, I can feel the pain, the sting, right, for the moment. But even in feeling that sting, I think it's important to be told, because whose life am I going to help? Like, here's a woman who came from this and was able to make it through this, could have gotten some situations, could have landed me in prison, in jail, could have gotten some situations that were really sticky, was able to escape that, came from really great parents, but ended up sometimes doing some things that's not so great, getting in bad relationships, falling victim to some street things, and then able to overcome, become this college professor, hopefully inspiring youth. And really, using my story as a catalyst for others.
Yeah, I think you definitely are.
Thank you.
When you were gathering these stories and you're going through the process, doing the photo shoots and meeting these people and interacting with them, are there any stories about putting this together that stand out to you, of just maybe an interaction that you had, or, someone who you met, or just anything about that whole process? Because, it must have been fascinating to photograph with these people and, hear their stories and record them and ask them these questions. My mind is just racing at all of the different stuff that must be in there.
Yeah. So basically, I did a Google form for them. So I didn't get to read their stories until after they were photographed, which I would do differently this time. I probably would take the story first. But when I put together the stories, it was like, wow. You have so many different stories. Like, one of the stories that I requested personally, story from one of my students, who was an amazing student, was in my mentorship program. His name is Isaac. He doesn't mind. He's from Africa, and just a bright guy, very intelligent. He took 3 or 4 of my English classes, and he was in a bad situation, wrong time, wrong place. And he got arrested, and he had to do like a couple of months in jail, maybe 16 months, something crazy like that, maybe a little bit over a year. And, he had such a bright future. And then all of a sudden, he almost saw everything go down the drain because of this one mistake that he made. And so he was like, you sure you want my story? I was like, yes, I want your story. Because, of course, he's doing well now. He went back to his country, and he's going for his master's, But here it is, a bright guy in a situation, thinking he's doing the right thing, trying to help his friend. He got pulled over by the cops or something. And I guess they got him for resisting arrest, or being like, because he's like, no, this is I wasn't part of this fight, but because he was tussling with the cops, even though he wasn't a part of it, he did time because of it. He took a plea deal. Yeah, and he is a bright kid, one of my favorite students, and just getting caught up in this situation, And so I think it's important. Yeah, it's very sad. And, we don't understand that how, I wish the justice system was more fair because, if I was the judge, if I see a kid like this, no matter who it is, I know this kid is not normally getting in trouble. I'm going to try to help a kid out, so that he doesn't have a record for his whole life,
Right, yeah.
But the justice is not always like that. It's not always fair to every culture. So that, that was one of the stories I think that needed to be told. But there's so many different kinds of stories in there of professionally people, quitting their jobs and starting their own careers and the fear that comes with that, but also the freedom that comes with that. So, I wanted a gamut of stories and we got that. So that was important to me.
Sounds like it's an amazing book, an amazing project filled with interesting stories. So I definitely encourage anyone who likes stories should check it out. I would just like to give you an opportunity to basically plug anything at all in the world. What's important to you? What do you, want other people to know about or pay attention to?
Yeah, sure. I think that I just want to, anything that I want to leave is this, that no matter, it doesn't matter how old you are, what you've been through, what your story is, you can always recreate that story and change the narrative of it. And I think that's important to say because, we get stuck sometimes in a situation and we think that is it, we get to a certain age and we're like, oh, it's too late. It's not too late. I look at that, people who created some amazing things through failures and in history, people 60 years old making history, doing things, 40, 50s. I have students that come to me in their 50s and restarting life and they be the best students ever. And they've really found a different passion and I see it in their eyes. I like seeing them go from like fear to like knowing they can do it, and it gives me so much inspiration to see that. So I want to say that like, don't let fear grip you, you're the captain of your own ship, and it doesn't matter what you've been through, what you feel, what you suffer from. If you didn't have parents, if you were in abusive relationships, if your resources weren't there for you, if you were broke at one point, if you were homeless, if you suffer from sexual abuse, molestation, whatever the situation is, you can always change the narrative for yourself and ways change the story if you really, really believe in it and put faith in it and get the healing that you need in whatever way you can.
Chalet, I appreciate your time. I think this was a fantastic conversation. I encourage anyone listening to go and pick up Black from Scratch, to go and pick up Black Dresses Stain and ReLive. I don't know if you have any other social media or anything else you want to plug or anything else you want to, direct people to.
I do have social media, Chalet's Wit. So my name is spelled like the French Chalet, CHALETSWITS. So chaletswits.com. That's my website. And you can find on my Facebook page, everything else is on there that you need. So
that's the end of this episode's conversation. If you enjoy this show, please consider suggesting it to a friend and rate us highly wherever you listen to podcasts. If you didn't enjoy the show, let us know how we can improve it at bitesizebiographies.com/feedback. One of my goals as a podcaster is to help you find things you might enjoy. Up next is a promotion from a fellow podcaster. If you enjoy it, why not check out their show? Please note, this is not a paid promotion. It's just an attempt at helping you find a podcast you might enjoy and helping fellow podcasters connect with audiences that enjoy their work.
Everybody has a story, and not all of those stories are clear black and white issues, even when we think they are. We wonder, how did this happen? Or what is that like? Or what happens next? Are you sure you really want to know? This is Ignorance Was Bliss at IWB Podcast.
Bite-Sized Biographies is a passion project created and hosted by me, Corey Thorpe. The inspiration for the podcast came as I listened to a recording of my deceased grandfather and found myself with questions I could no longer ask him. I realized that many people never take the time to tell their story, which means that rich and interesting sagas of life are continually being lost to time. I felt something had to be done to record those stories of life, and bite-sized biographies is my way of telling some of those stories, while simultaneously encouraging you, no matter who you are, to tell your story. Thank you for listening.